ingredient, so I have to buy at least 6 basil pots a year.
Okay, we're talking flowers on here on the Blasters and Blades podcast.
It's not a flower.
Plant, green thing, whatever. You eat it. Yeah, we're going to go with that. Anyway, welcome back to another episode of the Blasters and Blades podcast. So, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just 3 nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So without further ado, we get to introduce you to our reoccurring guest, the one, the only, the legendary NASA enthusiast, Kevin Ikenberry. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm great. Didn't I just see you guys last week?
Yes,
maybe.
JR came and made a special couple-hour only appearance at Fantasy.
So I can easily say I'm still recovering. So
yeah, my face is kind of ugly. That's why I have to use the avatar. I broke a few people's brains, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about you, Mr. Kevin. So can you tell the audience a little bit about you in case they haven't listened to the other 2 episodes?
Sure. So I write military science fiction primarily. I've got about 15 novels now. I'm a retired Army officer. I spent the first 2/3 of my career as an armor officer and then transitioned over to space operations. So I did space before Space Force. So that makes me cool. Hobbies, play volleyball with my daughter, do a lot of coaching there. I play golf as well. So just try to keep doing my thing. And I keep working with space every day.
So does Putt-Putt count as golf? Because if so, I am an expert. Like, look out Tiger Woods.
Totally.
Don't give me that judgy face, Doc. That's not nice.
No,
you just know I'm going to beat you.
Way more fun than golf.
It is. I'm like a putt-putt shark.
I like croquet though.
Croquet. I've played that before too. Not many people play that anymore. It's kind of
more violent.
Yeah, we had some serious family fights over the croquet at the family reunions. Handleys can get vicious over sports.
No, not in my family. However, that is probably the only one where I hit my cousin in the head with a croquet mallet.
Did he have it coming?
Yes, he did. We weren't playing croquet though.
So you weren't using his head as the ball?
No.
Okay. So now that we've established that putt-putt counts and look out LPG, whatever professional golf is. I'm not up with all the sports, as you can tell. Next, we get to talk about how we first found them. So I actually found them, like I mentioned before, through the Four Horsemen universe, and the rest, as they say, is history. And then we brought Doc onto the podcast, who's like a super fan, and she's like, no, you will interview him more. So here we are.
You make me sound like a dictator.
You are. It's okay, though.
I'm not. I'm a director. There's a difference.
What is that difference?
Small difference.
The rest of us want to know what the difference is.
Manners?
Okay. So how did you first find Kevin? Is it another Boo story?
Yeah.
As if there's sobriety in her life.
So we were at LibertyCon and I had somebody go, hey, this is Kevin Eichenberry. You should really meet him. And I'm like, yes, I'm serving him a drink. So, and the rest is
history.
Yeah. Okay. So can he hold his own liquor, or does
he can.
Okay.
And he can drink decent beer, which not all Army officers do.
What is decent beer?
He tends to drink. I can't remember your drink. You tend to drink bourbon.
Yeah.
So, but I've seen you with the beer once or twice, but it wasn't like piss water, I
can't do those.
So yeah.
Microbrews are where it's at.
Yes, they are.
Yep, I agree.
So.
Microbrewers or bourbon.
And Doc, since we've asked him these questions before, you get to on the fly pick the religion questions with some different properties.
Okay. Are we doing Star Trek?
You can do what you want. You're the dictator. I mean, director.
Babylon 5. Babylon 5. Okay, fine. Which Star Trek? Deep Space Nine, Babylon 5 is not a Star Trek.
Yes, it is. They stole the idea. We can go with it.
He likes to pick on me, I swear. So Stargate, Babylon 5, or Terra Nova. There we go.
Ooh. See, out of those, I would probably go with Babylon 5. Yeah.
Terra Nova was awesome. Dinosaurs. How can you go wrong?
I really love Terra Nova.
Me too. Those bastards over at Fox killed it.
Well, that's what they do to everything that's
I was
good.
going to say that sounds like a recurring theme.
It is. And they left us on such a cliffhanger. I'm like, you sons of... Yeah, I was not happy.
Yeah, Firefly, and didn't they do the same thing to like Space Above and Beyond? I mean,
Going back a little bit, but yeah.
They think that they're like the person who thinks they like sci-fi and then never get, and it's like, no, maybe not. It's too hard. You're thinking. So fantasy, Forgotten Realms, Heralds of Valdemar, or the Driz Cycle.
I don't read fantasy, and it's not from just like a hatred or anything of it. I don't have a lot of time, and honestly, the last fantasy I read were the David Eddings series in the 90s, the Bulgariad, the Tango.
Oh, good stuff.
And I really enjoyed.
Don't read a lot of it, but you do go for good stuff when you do.
Yeah,
that was
I don't drink a lot of scotch except for when it's very expensive.
That was my first grown-up fantasy series that I read, and then the Homecoming Saga for Sci-Fi. So It's a good one.
Yep.
Grown-up fantasy?
Yeah, it's just fantasy has not been my thing for a while, but I would go back to the Eddings books in a heartbeat.
Grown up as in like not for designed for little kids with 12-year-old protagonists that suddenly their parents die and they rule the world.
Right. The thing I loved about Eddings' books, and it's a minor segue, but the way that he writes all the different characters so well, and then their interactions when they have like a large group scene is just tremendous. I really enjoyed those books.
Yeah.
Do you think they influence how you write your interactive scene, the scenes where your characters interact?
I try to aspire to that, yeah.
Well, so part of his premise for the Bulgarian series was the names were so similar that if he didn't personify them so differently, you wouldn't know who the heck was talking or what the character was. So he kind of like with that premise that he started with had to, or the whole thing would have flopped.
Oh yeah. The personality totally comes through with every line of dialogue for every different character. It's really pretty cool.
That's good. That's good, because if they're all the same, it gets boring, and it's really hard on the narrators if somebody's going to narrate the book.
Yeah,
the narrator. I just bought the audiobooks for those because they started releasing them, and unlike some of the older series where they literally just like digitized the 1990s crappy recording, this one actually is pretty good quality for the Bulgarian series.
Nice.
That's good to know.
They don't have all of them, but.
So obviously, sci-fi is your main love and your main squeeze. What is it that you love about sci-fi?
I've said it before, and I think that sci-fi comes back to, for me, one of Ray Bradbury's quotes, that it's the realm of the possible. Right? There's so many things that we can write in science fiction that are hopeful, that we're looking forward to potentially seeing in our world. I think we all wanted flying cars after watching the Jetsons as kids, right? Science fiction is still kind of it's still pointing in that direction, that there are things from a technological aspect, there's things from a humanitarian and a sociological aspect that we're aspiring towards. So it really is the realm of the possible for me, and that's why I've always gravitated towards it.
Good answer.
I love waiting to see if JR approves the answer.
One.
So, well, what was your first memory in the genre?
Probably a tie. I don't know exactly when I discovered this, but of course Star Wars came out in 1977, and I was little at that point. I was 6. And then about the same time, my dad at that point was a biology professor, and in his office he had a couple of books from Asimov. He had The Caves of Steel and I, Robot, and then he also had some Arthur C. Clarke in there too. And that was, I remember, looking at the books on the shelf and, what's that? And, pull off the book and read the back cover. Well, this kind of sounds kind of like science fiction. So don't remember reading those books at that age. I remember reading them later, but that was kind of my introduction to the genre. Was all about the same time.
So what does your dad, the biology professor, think about your aliens?
Dad has kind of become a really big fan to the point that in my last Four Horsemen book, Fields of Fire, I kill off a pretty major character at the end, and I've told many people it was kind of unplanned. It went against my original outline, but as I sat and wrote the scene, I realized that was what needed to happen. And I was a mess writing the scene. I was a mess the next day. And when I sent the book out, I get a message from my dad. It's like, I'm not talking to you. And I was like, Dad, what's wrong? He's like, you killed, blank. I was like, yeah, I did. So he didn't talk to me for a week. So I think I did okay.
You did okay when you make the editors cry. So did it do that?
Yeah, I got the editor. Yeah, Maya Cleve is my editor. Yeah, I got her. One of my beta readers wrote back with, "You son of a bitch." So yeah, well I got a couple of people with that one.
Except for Cisca, she never cries because she's a part robot. She doesn't have feelings.
I cried when I read Moretta, Lady of Fern.
Oh, that's a pretty good fantasy novel. I'll have to check it out.
Bite me, bitch.
She's feeling feisty this morning. All right. So how did your love of the speculative fiction genre, more specifically science fiction, transition into you writing novels in it?
It's kind of funny that we're on to talk about Runs in the Family, because that was the first time I ever had an idea to write a book. I had been told when I was in high school and then again in college that I was a good writer. I had an English minor in college, but I was doing that because I thought I was going to go to law school, which I'm very glad that I did not do. But when I was working at Space Camp, we came up with little vignettes and little things to kind of enhance the kids' experience going through things. And there was a point in there where I thought I could kind of put all this kind of stuff together as a novel, and I did, and it's terrible. It'll never see the light of day. But it was a 2009-ish. I was at my desk one day, and I had this idea for a character, and it was Marin Shields from Runs in the Family, and that kind of got me started writing.
So are you just like a marketing whiz and put Runs in the Family behind you? It's like right behind your head.
There, yeah, there it is.
Or does it live there in its proud space?
Yeah, I put it up there.
No, it was an accident. Honest, just
I thought about doing the green screen and have it, in the screen behind me, but that works.
That's more subtle.
Yeah,
that's more subtle. I dig it. It took me a second, like, wait, is that the cover? So many authors let their own real life experience influence the stories they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments that shaped you as a storyteller?
Yeah, definitely. And it's been fun to kind of write a few of them into different novels. So Runs in the Family has two of them. It has a story that I've told at the No Kidding There I Was panel at DragonCon a couple years ago, and some other places. And then it actually there's a point where I break down my first jump out of an airplane years ago, and so both of those appear in Runs in the Family. So yeah, those moments certainly come through in my writing.
Fair enough. Hopefully the plane wasn't breaking down as you jumped out of it, and it was just for grins and giggles.
No, it was all planned. three weeks of training, and they throw you out the door.
That's always a plus.
You know what? My grandfather jumped, and he told me that was the best way to do it, is to have the Army cover it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, by the time you get to when you go through the airborne school, by the time you get to the last week where it's jump week, you are so ready to do it that you don't even think about it. My first jump, I was designated as the doorman, so it means I was the first guy out the door on my pass over the landing zone. So I'm actually holding onto the doors of the C-130, and after we go through all the jump commands and whatever else, and then the light above my head goes green, and the jump master slapped me on the rear end, and I jumped. I didn't even think about it. You jump out and you do the count, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, wham, the parachute opens, you look up and you check your canopy and you check everything else and you look down, you're like, I just jumped out of an airplane. What the hell am I doing? Then it was like, oh, this is really pretty awesome. So
there are certain...
Go ahead.
I say there are certain moments in life where you certainly question your life decisions.
Oh yeah.
That might have been one of them as you're floating to the ground.
Exactly. That was one of them for about 5 seconds, and then it was like, this is really pretty cool.
That's awesome.
That is the one regret, that I got hurt before I could go. So I was actually slotted on after my last tour when Uncle Sam had other plans for my retirement.
Yeah.
So it happens.
I really did not want to be too gravity defying, but
well, not everybody can be crazy.
no, I'm crazy, just not in that way.
Well, you heard it here first. She acknowledges her insanity. So speaking of military science fiction, we talked about already that you were in the U.S. Army. So we ask all of our authors who are military veterans this question, but how do you feel like your time in the big green weenie affects the stories you tell?
It totally does. From characterizations of folks that I've met, both nicely and not so nicely. When I write out battle sequences, I use the old operational terms and graphics I learned as a lieutenant, and I draw out the terrain and everything. So it's all part of it. It's how you visualize things. It's how you write relatable fiction. And there's certain parts of it that some readers will look at and go, I don't understand why this is so important. I had a reader write into me one time that they were very thankful that I went through the entire call for field artillery process, call for fire, because it's got certain nuances that you have to do. And it's just one of those things that, it amplifies the realism of the story, but at the same time, it's also how things are really done. And some of that can be pretty interesting.
Yeah, you will run into sometimes that stuff gets outdated. I remember I'm writing a series where modern military unit goes to fantasy places, and the co-author asked me for a list of military equipment, so I quickly wrote it up. I'm like, I know all this, and I sent it through just to check my own self because I didn't handle some of the rockets and stuff like that, which wasn't my specialty. To someone I knew who was an expert, he goes, "Bro, this is like 1990s active duty or early 2000s National Guard units that are conglomerated." I'm like, yeah, that's what I served. He goes, bro, that's 14 years ago. That shit's out of date.
Yeah.
Damn it. So it's amazing sometimes how quickly stuff can change, especially since the war in Iraq started. Oh,
absolutely. I had somebody write back, why do these guys that are working a couple hundred years in the future use the same kind of fire commands in a tank that we do currently? And my response was, that's one of those things where if it's not broke, don't fix it. So...
Okay. So you mentioned that you drew on people that you knew, and both individually and archetypically for your writing, but does the time you spent in the Army affect the kind of stories you read and how you engage in them?
Yeah, it does. There's certain things, especially when I'm in the middle of writing a novel project. I read a lot of nonfiction when I do that. But in between things, when I'm reading particularly somebody else's stuff, there's certainly aspects of different fiction that call to me. Action thrillers, action adventure thrillers. Those are a lot of fun to read. It's kind of funny that in some cases I can tell when an author might have not actually had the military service, or they've used somebody else kind of as a proxy. It's just it's the nuance piece, right? I remember reading a story someone had submitted through a critique group years ago, where one of the lower enlisted, looks at the platoon leader and says "Sarge," and I'm like, that's never going to happen. That will never happen.
So Sarge is a thing that was more in use and accepted during, I think, like World War II, Korea era, and it faded out. Absolutely. And it still happens, but mostly it was if you were already had a relationship with the person, or you just wanted to mess with them and you were willing to take the flack that came with it. Because wall-to-wall counseling was real.
Yeah, wall-to-wall counseling was a real thing.
Yes, so very much so. Even in the Pogue units that I was in, it was still very much a real thing. And you knew when you done screwed up. Excuse me? Yeah, we had an NCO and who was in my gaming group, and another soul. He joined later on, and he was the DM. And it was very funny because one of the guys who he showed up to a couple of games, but I think he got a little intimidated afterwards because he went up, "Hey, Ray," and he turns around and he goes, "What? Specialist?"
Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually very funny. He definitely earned his ice cream that day.
Yeah, I watched an Army lieutenant try to use a first name on a master sergeant one day. That went real well.
I tended to try to avoid the lieutenants wherever possible.
A good plan.
Yeah. We had one case where we had a cadet came in, like, because they'll do those things where they go to the units.
Yeah, like CTLT.
And that was funny because he ended up, his dad was a sergeant major. And so he accidentally slipped and called him dad. But nobody heard it except for like 2 or 3 people. And he goes, into my office. And they're like, oh, the sergeant major took a cadet. And it was more like he had gotten a text message and they didn't really run into each other typically in the day.
Yeah.
And it was just like, they bumped into each other and he's like, Dad, ah.
Yeah.
So,
I can totally see that.
It was funny as hell. We all thought it was hilarious and told everybody that the cadet basically died.
The worst ones were the cadets that came and thought you should salute them and that they were real lieutenants. Yeah, that was our reaction too. I'm like, yeah, you go over there and count grass or something.
Yeah.
All right, it's time for your most favoriteest questions of all.
Fandom questions. So I know some of these answers are what they pertain to in the Four Horsemen universe. But have you had anybody cosplay or fan art for your own unique series? Like Run in the Family is unique from Four Horsemen. So
it is. I haven't had anybody cosplay or do anything from Runs in the Family or from the Protocol War books yet. Okay. Yeah, but I have had a cosplayer from the Four Horsemen universe, which was kind of it's an incredible moment to recognize that they're cosplaying your characters, or they're cosplaying something that you've created. Being at Fantasy and seeing the Peacemakers from the Four Horsemen Mercenary Guild Association, our fan group. I got called up to give an impromptu remarks at their awards ceremony, and I'm standing there and I'm looking at the 3 guys on the front row that are all wearing Peacemaker stuff, and I choked up. I couldn't get it out because you're thinking, wow, this is something that people are really getting into. And I've seen some different T-shirts and everything now, and that's tremendous. It's humbling in a way, because you see so much of their love and appreciation for what you do, and it manifests in what they wear, and it's just pretty doggone cool. I can't say anything else besides that.
My first story in the Four Horsemen anthology was a Peacemaker story, and I remember getting a call from Chris Kennedy, and he said, well, if you write something and someone else writes something, whoever's first in, best dressed, that's what we're going with. It's automatically canon, and you beat me turning your story in. So I remember getting a call. I'm like, I hate to do this to you, but you're going to need to do a major rewrite because he made all these changes.
Yeah. That was something that was completely unplanned. I was in the process. I had just finished the second of the Protocol War books, and I was looking at other projects. And Chuck Gannon is a friend of mine, and Chuck introduced me to Chris and Mark through the anthology call. And I wrote a story and sent it in, and everything just kind of took off from there. So sorry I beat you to it.
Yeah, it happens. I just thought it was funny that it was you, given that we're here.
Yeah, that is funny. I know you've done amazing stuff, not just with Four Horsemen, but on your own. And it's really awesome. Chuck's got an eye for talent, that's for sure. So have you had anybody ask you for your autograph away from cons, drop ad forms?
So not so much ask for an autograph, but it was kind of funny because I have a teenager, and my daughter was in class last school year, and she was introducing herself, and they were asking questions about the family because she had started a new school. So, do you have any brothers and sisters and whatever else? And she said, well, and my dad's a writer. And the teacher was like, oh, well, what's he write? Well, he writes science fiction. About that time, one of the other kids in the class types my name into Google, and it comes up with this sidebar with my photo and says author. And there was this explosion of, oh, he's really an author. And of course, my daughter comes home, both at a combination of thoroughly embarrassed and really proud, as teenagers do. So it was kind of funny.
So that's awesome. That has got to be a very special moment. And let's wait and see if she gets into writing too. That'll make it very interesting.
Well,
That does happen.
my oldest is she's actually a really, really good artist.
Oh, cool.
It's developing more every day. She's really into manga, and she's got a lot of talent with a pencil in her hands. It's really kind of fun to watch. I keep getting on her to write, but she likes the art piece. So
no, I mean the art piece is really valid too, and it's definitely in different story format. So
absolutely, and I told her, I said, when you're ready to start writing stories, I've got a couple of novels, a couple of books over here on the shelf. I'll get you because there's some really good stuff.
So, but we should have Nick on and do a comic book episode. Have her listen to some of those where they talk about some of the different ways you tell a story when you're involving pictures. So, they make total fun of me because I'm like, I think I've read a manga or 10, 20 and like one comic. And they're like, they're different. They're different, Cisca. I'm like, no, they're not.
They have pictures. They're all the same to me.
Now, on my writing shelf, though, I've got a bunch of storybooks, but I also have comics and sequential art by Will Eisner because there's so much there. When you talk about being able to, in a comic, you see the scenery, you see the scene, and being able to translate some of that to words is very important. So as you look at how comic scripts are written and how authors and writers actually put that together and then have the artist kind of manifest it, there's a lot to draw on there. So,
well, have you spotted someone reading one of your books out in the wild?
I have. I was at one of the bigger shows. I think it was Phoenix Comic Fest, and when you have a big booth that you're a part of and you're selling books, you kind of lose track of the people that buy your stuff. And one of the mornings, I remember getting up in the hotel and walking down to get ready to make my way over to the convention center, and someone was sitting in the lobby reading Sleeper Protocol, which was really pretty cool.
That is awesome. So, and Sleeper Protocol, is that one of your Four Horsemen ones?
No, that's the first of the Protocol War books.
Okay.
So I have Sleeper Protocol and Vendetta Protocol at this point.
So we've actually interviewed him about that on the Sci-Fi Shenanigans, and I don't know if I pulled that out of the archives yet, but it's on the list.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. I'll definitely listen to it. I think that was before I was on Sci-Fi.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was.
What interaction you've had?
I said, I think it was before you were on SF Shenanigans. So,
but we still pull from that because, we're crazy. But what was the craziest fan interaction you've had? Was it making all the peacekeepers drink the grog?
No, that's part of the job. When you do the dining out and you're one of the speaking roles, it's kind of part of the job. God, I don't know if I've got a really crazy one. The one that is pretty much, I'd say, the most impactful is DragonCon a couple years ago. I was invited to be one of the authors at Sherilyn Kenyon's big ball that she puts on. And I had a table set up there next to my buddy Quincy Allen and a couple other folks, and we're just talking and everything else. And this gentleman walks up with his wife, and he starts talking to me, and I realized very quickly he's from Australia, and they've made arrangements to be at DragonCon as part of a trip here to the States. And one of the people that he wanted to meet was me. And that was, I just remember kind of standing there with my mouth hanging open, like, you've got to be kidding me. And that was pretty amazing.
Sorry, JR just typed in the chat what episode it was. It was episode 69 out of season 1.
So that was before she came along.
So that made me giggle.
I didn't realize that either.
I was just curious if it was season 1 because, with her being such a big fan, I wasn't sure if it was we interviewed you because of her or not. Apparently, it was just on your own merit. She didn't have to bribe us to get you to interview you. So well done.
I don't bribe. You're too cheap to bribe. I just tell you.
All right. So on that happy note.
So, can you give us the highlights of what you've written in your body of work?
So I have the Protocol War series that has 2 books in it so far, Sleeper Protocol and Vendetta Protocol. I will eventually get around to finishing that. This little thing called the Four Horsemen kind of got in the way.
Yeah, but Mark, it's ending eventually.
It will eventually end. But then with it being a universe, there's so many places where you can kind of go back into the timeline and tell additional stories. I don't think it will really ever end. But the main storylines will come to a close. Outside of the protocol, where I have what's called the Imprint War series, that's where Runs in the Family fits in, and then it's got a novel that's kind of a sequel but kind of a prequel both, that's called Dereliction of Duty, that came out last year. I will probably write a third book in that series later this year. It kind of depends on how the writing calendar goes, but I've had people that have asked for it and want to do it, so I want to try. And then, of course, the Four Horsemen books, of which there are now
a lot.
I have 5 individual novels, 3 co-written novels. So a lot of another co-written novel probably getting underway here very soon. So that's been pretty big. And then about a year and a half ago, Chris published one of my other novels, which is completely outside of everything. It's not even military science fiction. It's a kind of a crime novel in space. Elmore Leonard was one of my literary heroes. So he's the guy behind Jackie Brown, the movie. I just lost Out of Sight as another one. Be Cool, Get Shorty, all of those kind of books. And this book is called Super Sync, and it's about a couple of salvage crews in orbit trying to go after a satellite that's worth an awful lot of money, but they have a lot of problems between the 4 of them. So they have to see who exactly you want to pull for, and it keeps you guessing kind of to the end, which is kind of fun.
All right. Well, that all sounds fascinating, but you sort of spilled the beans earlier and told them we're here to talk about Runs in the Family. So where did you get the premise for this series or for this novel, since it's a standalone? Was it psychedelics, Ouija board, tainted beef jerky?
I like to call it the idle Tuesday afternoon. I was back on active duty. I was teaching ROTC, and one afternoon I was at my desk, and I had a character start talking to me. It was just very clear that I had this idea at that moment. Something just crystallized that here's this character. And I started writing some notes about it. And I recognized after about my second page of notes that this was a book. And how the hell do I write a book? So being on a college campus, I talked to my commander at the time and said, hey, I want to go back and take a college class. He's like, go for it. So I took creative writing, and I had creative writing in college because I was an English minor. And I turned in my first assignment, and the professor asked me why I wasn't published. And at that point, I had no answer for them. And I just decided to start writing. And so part of my job in that class was, as an auditor, was I just wrote stories. So I wrote 3 or 4 different stories and had to submit them to markets. And of course was rejected, because that's what writers do when they first start. But then in the process of that, I started writing the book Runs in the Family. And it was an adventure. It was the first book I ever tried to write. It took me 18 months to write it. And it was a god-awful mess. When it finally was picked up by a publisher, I sat down with the editor, and the editor kind of leans across the table at me and says, we're going to make some cuts. And I lost the first 3 chapters, and I lost a couple others during the course of the book. And from a lessons learned perspective, I started in the wrong place. I went down rabbit holes that didn't need to be done, and that was kind of a great learning experience for me, because as I went through the modeling and the outlining for the next book that I tried to write, which was Sleeper Protocol, my debut novel, I wanted to do things differently, and I did a lot of research on outlining. I had a couple of mentors that I reached out to and kind of walked me through the process, and what I learned there changed the way that I write, because now I can average a book about every 12 weeks amongst family and everything else. So it takes me about 3 months to write a book now versus 18 months, which is a substantial improvement. So that's kind of the story of where it came from.
Okay. Well, speaking of the story of where it came from, now we're going to have the story of where this art came from. So can you tell me the story about this cover art and how it came to be?
So the original publisher for Runs in the Family was an outfit here in Colorado Springs that was named Strigidai Publishing. And when it came out, this was one of the books that they had that really kind of took off. It sold incredibly well. When we were going through the process of the cover art, I believe that the publisher reached out on one of the art freelance websites, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head right now. It's not Fiverr, but it's something else. But they reached out and got probably 12 or 15 different interpretations based on the premise of the book, and kind of a little write-up of a synopsis that you post. And this was the one that we selected. I wish I could remember the site name, because it was pretty cool. The focus was, you obviously had a tank, and you had a female protagonist, and so there were a lot of pieces that kind of came through, and this one just kind of resonated.
Is it Upwork? Because that's one of the ones people use or used to.
No, it's not Upwork. It was you know what's going to happen, JR? I will remember like 5 minutes after we finish recording. So
99 Designs or DeviantArt are the other two.
That's it. 99 Designs. That was it. It had the numbers in the title. That's it. Okay. Yes.
All right.
I like that. I kind of like how the swirl around the globe, the planet.
Wait, there's a swirl around the planet.
There's a. You're colorblind.
Cool.
It's subtle, but there's kind of this almost a ribbon, and it looks kind of like DNA.
That's exactly what it's supposed to be. Yeah, it's got a kind of a DNA piece to it, because the premise of Runs in the Family is that you have a young woman who is kind of a wallflower, right? She's finished college. She's very, very shy, very, at risk of saying nerdy. That's kind of the way it works, but. And she volunteers for an experiment that she's going to receive the memories of an ancestor who basically died in Afghanistan in 2016. And she has to process those memories and blossom into the warrior her ancestor was supposed to have been.
That sounds really cool. So Nick will be so proud, though, that I got some artsy comments in. So
I do like the tank in the forefront. Is she a tanker?
Yes, she is a tanker. That's what she becomes. So, it was fun to write that kind of story, that have this young woman who processes all this information and is immediately thrown into a situation of hurry up and wait. And while she's in hurry up and wait, she meets and falls in love with an alien, and then is forced to leave and go to war. And that transition for her is very jarring and shocking. And the process of her developing into a combat leader is not without challenge. She has an immediate commander who is essentially a drunkard and a coward, and who likes to blame his subordinates for things when they go wrong. So she becomes a target of his ire. But at the same time, she's learning how to succeed in really unimaginable situations, and it was a lot of fun. I had a friend of mine who was also a tanker send me a comment. He's like, "Dude, this is pretty much Starship Troopers for girls." It's like, yeah, I'll take that comment. I really will, because Starship Troopers is, at its core, that this is the book, not the movie. We're not talking about the movie. Just forget that the movie exists.
The movie is amazing.
I enjoyed the both.
I lost both of you there for a second.
I enjoyed both.
Well, I did too. I have less than 6 degrees of separation to the movie, to the star. So we'll talk about that later. But so the book, though, at its core, and it was one that I read in college when I was in ROTC. It's really about leadership and becoming a small unit leader. And there's a bunch of other stuff that is obviously part of the novel. But when you follow Johnny Rico's development, that's kind of reminiscent here, at least, of what I was trying to get at with Runs in the Family. So you've got this young woman who is learning from her mistakes and from her successes and translating that into becoming a more successful combat leader, which was a lot of fun to write.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll forgive you for your poor taste. It's not that I didn't enjoy the book, but it felt more like a philosophical treatise than an adventure novel.
Oh, and absolutely, that's there. But once you get past the philosophical treatise part of it and really look at just from the leadership perspective, I think you would see that there's a lot of story there in how Rico develops, which is, again, it's for me, that was the thing that resonated the most. The treatise part of it and some of the philosophy that Heinlein was doing there. I will admit to you that when I was in college, I kind of glazed past it. I was looking at the combat sequences and looking at that progression, because in ROTC, that's what you're focused on. You're focused on, how do I become this lieutenant? How do I become this leader, especially from a background that might not have actually had any of that. So that's why the book actually resonated with me more.
So if we had to force you to, we told you can either go play golf, but you can go play golf right now, but you have to give us a 30-second elevator pitch.
All right. So the elevator pitch for this novel is in the future, a young woman volunteers for an experiment to receive an ancestor's memories. And like I said before, she must blossom into the warrior that he was destined to have been.
See, there we go. That's a good 30-second. Jared was like, no, ask the 30-second. Mostly because sometimes authors come back with really funny answers. No, like yours was very on point. And sometimes they're like Mark, when we asked him for Four Horsemen, he basically started putting sounding like a recruitment poster in taglines. It was pretty funny. So we've talked some about what makes your story special and unique, but what tropes do you really feel Runs in the Family hits on?
I think it hits on several. I think the untested leader, the opportunity to follow a woman who has to develop. It falls along. There's a lot of intrigue in the story as her the alien that she falls in love with goes back to Earth. There's a whole other storyline that takes place there. There's the storyline of the weak commander, the weak commanding officer that she has to overcome. There's a lot. There's one of the tropes is that the aliens in this particular case are called the Greys. They're the little gray men, and you don't actually see them, but you see their vehicles and how they fight is very different. They actually, because of reasons that are not fully explained at this point in that universe, their tanks and their armor personnel carriers look like human tanks from the 1950s and 60s. So they have adopted what they saw on maybe an Earth observation mission, and that's what they're deploying. But because they are more technologically advanced, they're mass produced. They're very capable. They're much more capable than the original weapon systems were. So that makes it a lot of fun to write those. You've got something that looks like a Russian T-55 tank, but it's firing a particle beam. That's a little different. So it was kind of fun to kind of meld those technologies together too.
Awesome.
Good answer.
So what subgenres or genres do you think this story best fits into?
Well, it's clearly military sci-fi, but there's that little bit of romance piece to it. I won't lie. That's there. A lot of political intrigue. There's a lot of the thriller kind of aspect to some of the things that are happening away from the actual combat scenes. And again, there's a lot of it's a lot of development. So there's a lot of leadership skills that are highlighted in this as Marin develops, and that was kind of what I wanted to do.
So
okay.
And so, what is it that really pulls you into military sci-fi specifically?
For me, I think it's. Of course, and you guys are all vets and you understand this. I'll try to articulate this for folks that were not in the military. A lot of people think that the military, especially when you're working with folks, is about the mission, and it's really not. It's about the people around you. And while it's fun to tell the stories of combat and weapon systems, whether it's the Casper from the Four Horsemen universe or some of the stuff that Chris Kennedy and I are working on, that's like our take on Pacific Rim. You can certainly write about those types of technologies and have a lot of fun with it, but it really comes back down to those interactions with people and being able to place your characters in those realistic situations where you're seeing Marin have to deal with Colonel Coffee, who's her immediate commander, who again, he's a drunkard and a coward, and she sees this, but she can't overcome it because of her rank and her position in the initial part. And then you see how she responds to like her tank crew and the original unit that she's put into, which is basically a bunch of misfits. And they're sent off on this combat mission together, and she has to put them into a cohesive unit very quickly, and how that dynamic develops over time. So those types of interactions for me that's what draws me to military sci-fi is, I can write the technology, I can write the combat sequences and the tactics and whatever else, but when I look at over the course of my life, I've got a couple of areas where I met a lot of different characters, and the military was certainly one, and how everybody interacts with one another is a critical part of storytelling for me.
Okay. Well, speaking of storytelling, let's move on to the deeper into the story. So what can you tell us that you didn't already about the main character?
Well, as Marin develops, there's she's placed in some situations that are again very difficult, but she's also dealing with these memories that keep coming back. So as she's going through this process, it's not like just all of a sudden, wham, she gets the memories of the ancestor. She kind of has to start manifesting them, and as they come in, they come in at some opportune times and some inopportune times where she's understands immediately what the context of the memory that came up was, or she's kind of left like, what was that about? And then has to deal with the ramifications of that and realizes, well, okay, now I understand. Now there's a piece of that memory that applies to the situation either that I just went through or that I'm about to go through. And that's a lot of fun. The combat sequences are a lot of fun to write in this book, with looking at tanks that actually hover, that have more capable main guns. They have better weapon systems. They actually have kind of an AI interface on board that's part of the crew. So all of that is a lot of fun for me as a writer to be able to tie in and be able to place the reader into hopefully an immersive world that both makes sense and still makes them ask questions over the course of the novel that they can eventually have answered, which is what you want to do.
So do you feel like the AI has enough personality that it qualifies as a secondary character?
Not really. Not in this particular book, no. It's basically more like a command and control function for the tank, kind of like a caution and warning board, if you will. So rather than having just another display for a tank commander to have to look at, it's just another piece. So, excuse me, having the AI it's really not even an AI. It's kind of hard to really describe what the interface is, but it's just basically this platform that assists the commander being able to identify targets or being able to switch communication frequencies on the fly, that type of thing. So it's not necessarily a character. It's more like a system, if that makes sense.
It does. Speaking of characters and secondary characters, because those are a lot of fun. Were there any secondary characters in here that were especially memorable? Maybe a perky young sergeant who's like teaching her the way. I don't know. Sergeants run everything,
so there are.
No.
The mafia just thinks they're in charge.
I'm going to get between the E4 mafia and the NCOs here, so I'm going to choose my words carefully.
That's a safe place.
There are several characters that come into play here. It was kind of fun with because Marin comes in as a captain, so she inherits a couple of lieutenants, and the lieutenants are essentially conglomerations of some of the cadets I taught in ROTC, which was fun to piece them together. The commanding officer is a conglomeration of a couple of folks that I worked for over the course of my military career that made my life a living hell. So it was, again, kind of fun to put them together. Marin's love interest, the Talanara, was incredible to write and to try to be able to get into this piece of the story. So, and then the officers that are in charge of the process to imprint her, that's another piece there. And then the overall, like the division commander was that's again a conglomeration of some folks that I worked with, but he was a lot of fun to write because there were a couple of folks I worked for that I can easily say were unique individuals, and so having a chance to kind of piece that together was fun too.
Okay. So why did you make the decision to have her come in as a captain?
So that was a combination of some of the manifestations that are going on behind the scenes with this process. And it's felt to her that as she comes into this with those memories, that her ancestor was a captain. And so being able to help process the context, they make her the same rank, which really kind of rankles the Terran Defense Force, the overall military command structure above her. But at the same time, it makes the most sense for her to be able to process all of what's happening. So that's why she comes in as a captain, and she very quickly has to realize that, this is serious business, and she has to follow what those memories and what those gut feelings are telling her to do.
So do you end up covering how...
I can only imagine because,
Go ahead,
I can only imagine because there are enough people who get really fussy about college specialists. So I can only imagine how well that went over for her.
Yeah, it doesn't go over well, but again, it's one of the things that she begins to overcome is, be going from a situation where she was not even looking at the military as an option to now she's suddenly there. She's a captain. She's having to process all this and lead troops at the same time. For me, it was a lot of fun to write. I'm sure for her as a character, it was hell. It works.
So do you cover the disparity between the experiences of her ancestor who fought in 2016 versus clearly this is modern, or not modern, this is future tech. So like not all of the experience is going to line up exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a matter of that. It's not going to line up exactly, but it comes back to for most of that development piece, it's the context of it. It's the understanding, situations change. And she has to be able to think on the fly. She has to be able to look at and develop courses of action and be able to implement those or decide not to implement those based on risk. She applies the principles of leadership that are time honored and true, even going all the way back to like troop leading procedures. Being able to understand there's certain things that you have to do in the conduct of a mission to ensure your success or to ensure that you have the capability of grabbing success. And those are the things that she does. But then the contextual piece is, she goes from looking at an ancestor who died in 2016 fighting a counterinsurgency war to basically being peer-on-peer armored conflict, which is a very different thing than her ancestor was trained to fight. So yeah, there's a lot of that.
Okay. So, all right. That's a good answer. So speaking of good answers, we expect an excellent one from this question too. So who is the bad guy in this story that they face? Obviously we don't want spoilers because we want people to read the book, but who are the bad guys?
So the direct bad guy, of course, is the Greys, right? The alien race they're very shadowy and not a lot is known about them. So there's a lot of those sequences where they are fighting the Greys. But Marin's real personal antagonist is her immediate commander, the Colonel. And he gets promoted for valor. And, the valor was really Marin's and some of the other folks that he was willing to sacrifice, but he gets promoted for it. And so it's her overcoming him. And then near the end of the book in that climactic sequence, she faces him down. And I like the scene. I like where it went. It's very, very different from what an officer might actually do, but this is kind of writing fiction. So in the case of that, she makes a battlefield decision and executes it.
Okay. Just as long as you didn't execute him. They kind of get upset when you execute officers.
No spoilers.
Oh, I see what you did there. All right. So speaking of characters, if yours ever met you in a back alley, especially after all the things you did to both the dead 2016 ancestor and his offspring down the line, how do you see that playing out for you? Are they going to cut your head off and put it on a pike?
I don't think they would go that far, but it might not be an initial pleasant conversation. I would do my best to steer them for a drink and be able to talk nicely about things. But
would there be knife hands involved?
What? Say again?
Knife hand.
Oh yeah. I'd definitely get the knife hand. I can't believe you did this to me. Yeah, yep. Totally.
So in the universe, sometimes the universe itself is as much a protagonist as the characters. Can you give us a hint as to what kind of expansive world of tech we can expect in this expansive world? I really did drink coffee this morning, I swear.
I think from like a technological piece, it's kind of the best thing that we could hope for, right? So, in this particular universe, the ships have artificial gravity. They're capable of faster than light travel. There's the integration of technology at the personal level. There's the piece of being able to do or have almost anything. There's not really a lot of discussion about like the economics of the universe or anything along those lines. But there's the piece where, humanity has expanded into the galaxy. We've been able to get out and we've colonized worlds, and we're part of an overall, I think, and with runs in the family, we call it the Legion of Planets, right? It goes kind of back to the comic books, but still it all works together. And so you have all this where you build this expansive universe And then in my case, I kind of built this with some of the best case scenarios of the technology. I mean, like the near real time communications via Ansible, which is a really old science fiction trope, but it's there because it helps move, in this particular case, the story and the plot along.
All right. So do we get chemically propelled projectiles or pew pew lasers?
A little bit of both. Yeah, a little bit of both. And with the humans, with their tanks, it's more chemically propelled. But we also have some electromagnetic railgun technology that's used. But then, the aliens have particle beams, which makes them, from a standoff perspective, they're technically more advanced than us. But that's where the tactics and whatnot are applied a little bit differently.
Okay, Doc, it's one of your other favorite questions.
So what tech would you use in daily use, and how would you abuse it?
I think the ability to have a connection via what I call a comm set on their wrist is basically, it's kind of like the best of the internet, the technology, everything is all there. But then also being able to have music played directly to my ears. That's what I would totally use, because I'd be in my own little world all the time and nobody would be able to get my attention. So I would totally abuse that.
I very much like that one. I want that tech.
Sounds good. Apple would want you to have it too, and then they would just pump ads straight into your earbuds.
No, Audible would want
they
it.
might too. Bezos, all hail.
I listen to audiobooks,
so in many worlds, because we circle back a little bit to the characters, the universe that the stories are told in are almost as much a character as the people. So other than what you've already told us about, like the League of Planets and the ongoing war with the Greys, is there anything else about the universe that makes it stand out in the field of sci-fi?
I think it's a universe that has a lot of potential, because you're talking about a far future where humanity is basically learned to be very pacifistic, and as the Greys raise their ugly head, there are folks that are looking at ways that they can actually go back and be able to try to bring forward the tactics and the thought processes of folks from our time, because we were capable of waging war at a different level. So as things progress with this, and you kind of get towards I won't say the utopian type of society, but a very peaceful, very coexistent Earth. Earthlings at that point, they don't feel like there needs to be any real conflict. So they make a lot of progress to get off the planet and do the colonization piece. And as they do, then they realize that there are many sentient races out there, and there's a potential problem coming. And if they come back and attack Earth, there's no way that Earth's going to be able to stand.
Okay. So did you cover, without giving any spoilers, how you determined whose memory got saved to be implanted later? Was it happenstance?
So sure, without spoiling anything, there's a couple of things that come together. There is a completely fictional piece of technology that's deployed to Afghanistan to study brains. So we're looking at, like, the development of, as we were looking at mild traumatic brain injuries, or MTBIs. So there's this piece of technology that's developed to scan brains and kind of see, like, a before and after sort of thing, right? So they're scanning these folks as they go into combat situations, but then they don't get the opportunity to scan them later on. They recognize, though, with about 200 or so of the scans, that there's a significant amount of data that's actually captured. And what they've done is that they've actually isolated memory that's transitioning from short-term to long-term in the hippocampus. And so they're actually able to identify that and hold it. And then by using a DNA descendant, right, someone that has a replicative DNA of the original subject, they're able to graft the memory through DNA process, which, there's some theories that there's a certain aspect of instinct in memory that may actually be transmitted via DNA. I just kind of extrapolate that a little bit and then give it a little bit of alien technology to make it work.
Okay. So Runs in the Family is currently a standalone in a larger universe, but is the story of your main character done?
No, we're not done. There's more to it. I actually had started writing a sequel several years ago, but then the Four Horsemen came along, and I've had so much commitment there that I've decided to originally sit on the future of the storyline. But then as I was going through, I ended up going back and writing Dereliction of Duty, which kind of focuses on why they chose Marin. And it also has its own story as well. So there's kind of an interconnectedness to it there, but it's not a direct book as far as a prequel sequel, if that makes any sense.
It does. And
what do you have to bribe you to get it? I have bourbon. I have Angel's Envy. I got Writer's Tears, which is really a whiskey, but I got bourbon. Like, what do we need to bribe you with?
All I can tell you is my whiteboard's right behind the camera, and it's there. So it's just a matter now of I've got a major Four Horsemen novel to finish. That's kind of the preeminent thing right now, and then a couple of other projects that are in between that are partially written, and then from there, that I'm hopeful to get to that by the end of the year.
Cool.
So did the imprinting that they transferred over have to be familial, or did you cover that at all?
Yeah, it's best done if it's familial. So that's why that they've chosen her.
Okay, that works.
So, sorry.
It's your alien question, Doc. I know you get all choked up.
So I'm so excited. How do you go about designing the aliens you've done? Are they whole cloth, or are they, tropalicious? What?
There's some tropalicious to it, but there's also, we think, and I think sometimes in the creation of alien races, we have things where we, certain trope areas we go to, like there has to be an insectoid race, right? So in the Four Horsemen, we have the Minshaw that look like giant praying mantises. In this particular universe, you have the Vema, who are very similar. And, they were developed in, two very discordant ways, but it's the same kind of thing. So designing an alien is challenging. In this particular case, with the alien race that Marin gets involved with, they're called the Starahi, and they're very humanoid, but they are all hermaphroditic females. And that it's just it was something that I came up with, and I kind of was like, where the hell am I going with this? But I stuck with it, and it does kind of work. So there are certainly some alien races that have kind of the tropalicious part, but then there's the others that, I won't say that they're completely unique, but it was something that for me, it was enough of a difference and enough of a curiosity factor from an author perspective that I decided to explore it.
So do you rely on you mentioned earlier that your dad was a biologist or is a biologist. Do you ever call, hey Dad, I need some aliens?
Yeah, I've asked him a couple of questions in the course of character and species development, most recently within the Four Horsemen universe, just looking at particularly some of the mammals, like, we have the Ursine race, the bear-like race called the Ugar. And so being able to bounce some questions off of Dad is always a good thing. He hasn't done biology for quite some time. He's in his 80s now, and he left biology to work in university administration. But, you can't take the scientist out of a guy. So if there's something that Dad reads ahead of time and doesn't make sense, he will let me know. Like with the Chuck Gannon stories I've been writing in the Murphy's Lawless universe, I created a race there because I wanted to write a horse cavalry story, and Chuck said I had to create a species that they could actually use. So I created the Winalane, which are basically like large rideable lizards. And as I went through
wizards would be one heck of a fantasy.
Yeah, that would be. I'm not going to do that though. But in creating this race, I'd bounced a couple ideas off of Dad. So yeah. It's great to be able to reach back to him as much as I can.
Okay, that's good. All right, so clearly this interview is winding down. Before I start, rolling up the sidewalks, Doc, did you have any more sciencey questions? Because I know you laugh at my science knowledge.
I do laugh at your science knowledge. It is laughable. That is why. No, I do want to know. Seriously, we might have to circle back about the bribing. But this is in the Storybundle, right?
It is. Yeah, this is in the Danger Zone Storybundle that Kevin J. Anderson's put on. Benefits the Challenger Center for Space Science Education, which I actually have a direct connection to. When I left Space Camp, I was retired to work with a couple of Challenger Learning Centers. I worked with the one that was in Phoenix, Arizona, and then one that was being developed in Kansas. Both of those at the executive level before the Army called and said, hey, why don't you come back on active duty? Which I said, let me think about that for a second. Yes, and did. So Challenger Center is a organization that was started by the families of the Challenger astronauts with the idea of bringing space science education to kids all over the country. So now there's over 50 Challenger learning centers across the world, and they provide training for teachers and then bring the students in to actually conduct a mission in their simulated environment with mission control and with a spacecraft. And it's a fantastic STEM learning environment, and they do great work.
Yeah, getting kids to see the hands-on is and the application, because there's so much that's cognitive and you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
But getting them to understand that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it does. When you're watching kids in an environment and you see the light bulb kind of go on about what they're working on and how it has this impact to the overall mission itself, it's pretty tremendous. As a flight director with Challenger, I ran probably a little over 300 missions. And it was like I said, it's a great environment to be able to take students through. In some cases, teachers will actually teach the curriculum for the better part of a semester, and then they come to the Challenger Learning Center to actually then execute the mission. It's really fantastic to watch.
Yeah, and I think also kids are a lot more capable at science than sometimes we understand, and you just got to give them that application.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I got to ask then, does that mean you watched that, was it 80s movie Space Camp?
Yes, I actually have a copy of Space Camp, and one of my best friends is actually an extra in the movie.
Oh, cool.
Oh, that's cool.
I watched that with my kids. That's why.
Yep.
They were laughing at the computers being so big.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of laughable tech there, but yeah, it's kind of fun to watch the movie, and of course you really have to. In my case, I have to suspend like every amount of disbelief possible. But then be able to watch for my buddy and as a kid was kind of fun.
Yeah, no, that falls under the turn off your brain. It's off. Okay, now you can watch it.
Yeah. Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah, all kids are like that.
It looked real to my non-scientific brain. I'm like, oh, so that's how it works. So
you're adorable. It's really good you were an English major or a history major or whatever it was that didn't involve
English and history and pre-law. I couldn't commit. That's what my advisor told me. This isn't something that we should be proud of. This is just a failure to commit. That's what you get for being a
all of those involve brain power, but yet you still can't do chemistry.
I took Betty Crocker biology and calculus for non-majors, and I barely made it out alive. So
this is why I'm here.
It is. Aside from the fact that you just are bossy and tell us what to do. But before I dig myself another hole, so clearly this interview was winding down. So before we wrap this up, was there anything you wanted to tell us about Runs in the Family that we didn't ask?
Well, it's been out for a long time, and like it is the first book that I wrote. So if when I go back and look at it, it's like, ooh, I need to change that. But then there's the part of me that's like, no, you can't go back and change things. You just have to leave it. It's out and it's actually a wide distributed book. I think it's also on the Baen website as far as one of the books that you can get from them too. Has an audio version done by my friend Cindy Kay, who she just rocked it. There's no other way to put it. She's really pretty amazing. And yeah, that's pretty much it till I get a direct sequel written. So.
Okay. And so the Runs in the Family is part of that military sci-fi bundle over on Storybundle. So we talked about very in-depth and more than I knew about the charity. But what is your understanding for people who might not have heard of Storybundle about what that is? So
Storybundle, as far as I'm aware, is an opportunity for you to pay what you want for a bundle of books. And so they start with a certain number of books, and then they add bonus books onto that. And so Runs in the Family is technically one of the bonus books that's included with the bundle itself. But I think there's like 20 books that are part of this. And I think you can start at like 15 or 20 bucks to buy all of them. And then, of course, the authors get a portion of that, but most of that goes to the charity, which is really kind of a fun way to do this.
So anything below 15 gets you the first, let me count them, the first 4 books.
Yeah.
Wow. One of those 4 books is actually a bundle by Nathan B. Dodge, who's it's a box set with 5 novels in it. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 books is get you in for under 15. If you pay 15 or above, you get all of them, which is a total of 19 books. But because there's anthology bundles, there's a bundle of a box set. It's actually a lot. There's 2 box sets, so it ends up being a lot more. And then when you go to pay, after you set whatever dollar value you're going to pay, you can also pick. Right now, the base set is 70% for the authors, 30% for the story bundle.
Right.
But you get to pick how much goes to the author, how much goes to the charity, and so it's one of those things. You can add another 10% on top of that, what you pay for the books, just to the charity. So it's a good thing to support authors more directly, cut out the middleman, and some pretty cool charities. So did you pick the charity, or did Kevin Day Anderson just?
No, Kevin picks the charity. Kevin is actually, I think he is still on the national board for the Challenger Center for Space Science Education. So it's one that's near and dear to his heart too.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds like we've got all the questions. So before we let you go, you have to tell us how we can find you on the wild interwebs.
Sure. So my Facebook author page is author Kevin Eichenberry. I'm on Twitter at the writer Ike. My website is kevinikenberry.com, and that's really pretty much about it. If you go to my website, at the top there is a sign up for what I call the Reaction Squad. That's my mailing list. It gets a newsletter every month. I'm in the process of creating some content that will be developed for Patreon. So I'm working on that as well. That'll be some stuff that'll be outside of the normal universes, and hopefully be able to maybe throw a couple of ideas out to see if there are things that I could expand upon later on. But from a social media perspective, that's pretty much about it.
Okay, and all of those will be in the show notes, dear listener, with all the glorious content he sent us for the 4 Horsemen stuff, since he mentioned that. So you can follow us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters tech and tech blades, anchor.fm/blasters tech and tech blades. We are working on getting a proper website, but it's kind of low on the priority list. We have a Twitter at SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. We promise we answer it sometimes. You can send your hate mail to Cisca at blastersandbladespodcast.com. We have a Facebook group, facebook.com/blastersandbladespodcast. And you can support the show over at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it is for the podcast, and we will keep our co-hosts duly intoxicated while I'm your sober driver. And you could also support us over on Anchor FM for $5 or $10 a month, or any monetary value therein above that. And it helps keep the light on and pay for the upkeep, and as little or as much as you want. And now Doc is going to hate me for all the hate mail she gets. So close this out before I step in it even more.
You know what? We haven't gotten any yet, so we're all good. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. For the absentee Nick Garber, J.R. Handley, I'm Cisca. This was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, seeing if J.R. can learn what fantasy and sci-fi are, or even just science, and cheesy jokes and all things geeky. Have a great day.